On your Friday episode of Locked On Raptors, the Toronto Raptors fell on Wednesday night to the Brooklyn Nets. We will dig into the good, the bad, and the from that game. We'll hand out the dude of the week, and we will round out the show with a few listener questions regarding Nick Nurse, Thad Young, and so much more. That's all coming up on today's episode of Locked On Raptors. Thanks so much for hanging.
You are Locked On Raptors, your daily Toronto Raptors podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's going on? Welcome to episode number 1289 of Locked On Raptors for Friday, November the 25th. I'm your host, Sean Woodley. You can find me on Twitter at WoodleySean. I've also been covering the Toronto Raptors for 9 seasons, so there's plenty of old stuff you can go dig up from my time covering the team. Thanks for being along today. You can find the show at Locked On Raptors on Twitter as well. You can follow, subscribe to, rate, and review the show for free on your favorite podcast apps. And we are, of course, in video form on YouTube each and every day, so go hit the big red subscribe button. You can't miss it, and you have done a wonderful thing to help support the show and stroke my ego. All right, on today's show, we are going to dig into a few different things falling out of the Nets game on Wednesday. Truthfully, this game stunk, and, it did not inspire me to overcome my voice issues that I was dealing with on Thursday, perhaps related to Canada's World Cup game on Wednesday. So I didn't do the show yesterday to break down that Nets game. We will talk about it a bit today on the show, but also, what are we really learning right now from the Raptors? As I've kind of said, it feels like the evaluation period is on hold, and especially so now as the spunky underdog, shorthanded Raptors, the act is kind of wearing a little thin because they have no players. And that's going to lead to a lot of rough play, losses to teams like the Brooklyn Nets, who of course are very talented, but also don't seem to really care about playing basketball. Either way, there's not a ton to examine about Wednesday's game, truthfully, so we'll do the good, the bad, and the but we're not going to go full scope on the game on this show. We'll also talk about the dude of the week, which we got to hand out, and we got a couple questions at the end that we're going to get to from the listeners. But before we dive into the good, the bad, and the from the game against the Nets, I got to tell you that today's show is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline is where the game starts. Okay, let's get to it. The good, the bad, and the from the 112-98 loss to the Brooklyn Nets on Wednesday to fall to 9-9 for your Toronto Raptors on the season. 4-5 without Pascal Siakam. They're treading water, and boy, oh boy, Pascal Siakam's return cannot come soon enough. Without Fred VanVleet, without Scottie Barnes, without Pascal Siakam, I don't know how anyone could have expected the Raptors to really hang in this game against the Nets. I know they lost the night before to a Sixers team that was without its 3 best players, and so maybe you look at that and say you have to expect to win on the Wednesday. I don't think that's fair, and I don't think the Raptors were very much set up in this one to have a whole lot of success. And look, I think you have to start with my good for the game. Overall wasn't like the greatest game he's ever played, but I will say my good was OG Anunoby, who in this game had 15 points, 7 of 20 from the field. He had a couple steals, 5 boards, 4 assists, 0 of 3 from deep. The threes we've kind of talked about. I feel pretty certain that they're going to come back to where you expect them to be once the guys who create most of his threes are back in the lineup. Right now, it's a lot of self-created stuff. It's a lot of stuff created, because he's totally contested. There's not a lot in terms of free-flowing shots in the flow of the offense right now for OG from deep. And so I'm not even worried about the three-point shooting at this point. We know there's enough of a track record for him at this point through his career that he's clearly a very good three-point shooter. I just think he needs to have the guys around who are going to set him up with those looks, and he's going to start knocking them down. So that's not a concern for me. The turnovers, obviously 5 turnovers, not what you want either. We're kind of grasping at straws here for a good from this game, if we're being totally honest. But I do think there is some pretty encouraging stuff going on with the way OG's driving and the way he's driving with a plan. I feel like he's not really had a plan all that often in previous seasons when he decides to sort of make a foray into the paint. He kind of just depends on, all right, I'm stronger than everyone else. I'll probably get to the rim and finish there. We'll figure it out when we get there. But now it seems like when he drives, he's very directed in what he's doing. He either knows, okay, there's a mismatch I can go and size up. I'm going to drive this dude into the paint and I'm going to dunk over this guy, or I'm going to finish around him, whatever it might be. Or he knows that there's going to be a passing option for him, whether it's a dump off pass, whether it's a kick out. it just feels like he's a lot more refined on those drives. We're seeing fewer of the situations where he kind of gets to the middle part of those drives, gets to 12 feet out, and he kind of loses the plot. He loses the handle, his balance falls off. That seems to be kind of going away, and he's just plunging right into the heart of the defense, and that's awesome to see. When the Raptors are at full health, that's going to be an incredible weapon for the Raptors to rely upon. When it's the main source of creation for the team, the general lack of, top playmaker instincts and scoring acumen are going to come into play. And the fact that he's being surrounded by a bunch of guys who you can't really trust to make shots right now also is going to come into play. He's basically doing the Pascal Siakam and Tampa thing where he's driving into a bunch of traffic and then hoping there's an open look. And if he creates an open look, it's usually going to get missed because the guy shooting it's not a great shooter. I don't think it's quite as dire right now as it was in Tampa, but it's kind of the same idea. And it's very much a Tampa Raptors ass roster out there right now. And so I don't think it's shocking that OG's struggling with his completion and his finishing around the basket. That's just going to be part of the deal when you are the main source of attention for the other team's defense. But I do think overall the driving has gotten a lot more refined, and the turnovers will become less of an issue when he's not asked to be the main source of creative options for the Raptors, right? He'll probably be number 4 in that list, and that is, to me, totally fine. Maybe even third. Maybe you level him up ahead of Fred VanVleet just because of those paint touches, because of the size, because of Fred VanVleet's off-ball gravity. That would be an ideal thing too, but you know that Scottie Barnes and Pascal Siakam, they're going to be the guys doing the lion's share of the playmaking, and I think for OG to kind of get these reps, it's obviously a good thing. He's getting a chance right now to kind of test the waters, see what works, see what doesn't, but I really don't think there's a guy who's more eager to get the rest of the team back right now than OG Anunoby, because things are just going to get so much easier for him when that happens. My bad for the game against the Nets. It's honestly just the injuries at this point. I'm really sick of watching these haphazard, barely stitched together rosters have to play basketball games. It sucks, and there's no one's fault necessarily. Yeah, the Raptors kind of play a very intense style. Maybe that's conducive to injury, but also a lot of it's been freak stuff that you can't really plan for, account for, attribute a whole lot to. And so it's just really this kind of waiting game for the team to get whole, or even sort of whole once again. It's sort of a basketball team when you have Fred and Scottie and OG playing together. There's something that resembles a functional, workable roster basketball team, half-court offense, all of it when those guys are there. When they're not, this is not worth evaluating. They're 9-9. I don't know what that means. I don't know where you slot the Raptors in. My hunch is they're actually one of the 4 or 5 best teams in the Eastern Conference, and at full health, they'll start winning games to match that hunch. But right now, it's just such a difficult circumstance for them to work around, and I'm just kind of over this waiting period. It's been helpful to have none of these games, really, not a ton of games in the last week or so for the Raptors to have to play through without their guys. It's been nice to get this rest. It would be nice if the rest could pay off with guys coming back into the lineup as opposed to more guys shuffling out night to night. It would be cool if people could stop catching non-COVID illnesses on down the line. But I think the bad for me is just this waiting game. It feels like real dog days of the season right now because none of this matters. None of this is in any way going to determine the outcome of the season down the line. Yes, you're getting some nice contributions from guys who you otherwise wouldn't see get a lot of action if the team was at full health. But there's a benefit to that. That's good. But ultimately, man, just get the guys back and we can start actually having some fun again. Because right now, this ain't fun. This is just kind of waiting and killing the time. It's a grind out the clock situation until they can get some guys back. And hopefully this week is where that begins. Pascal Siakam figured to come back in the next week or so. That would be absolutely massive, as the schedule's about to get a little bit trickier here too. Busier, and also some good teams on the horizon for them to play. Coming out of the Nets game very quickly is Juancho Hernangomez maybe making his claim for a rotation spot right now. Really good in that Nets game on Wednesday. 10 points, 10 boards. He had 3 steals as well. He's 1 of 5 from deep. That's the one thing. He's at 25% from 3 this season. That's not good enough. He's going to have to shoot better than that. But if he does start to knock down his threes, can you really tell me the huge difference between Juancho Hernangomez and a properly performing Gary Trent Jr. on this team? I know that's crazy. Gary Trent Jr. is obviously a more creative player. He can do more stuff, sort of creating something from nothing. That's all well and good. But as far as the stuff the Raptors look for from their role players, which is knock down your shots and play good defense and rebound, Juancho's doing 2 of those 3 things right now. Gary Trent Jr. is doing sometimes one of those things. Like, I'm not saying Juancho is going to take Gary Trent Jr.'s spot in the rotation or anything like that, but I do think there's a pathway here for Juancho to play more minutes. And the fact that he's just been this like deflection king has been really cool to see. He's got like just a really good knack for knocking the ball out of the air, whether it's on the fly or whatever. He's just doing a pretty good job just being long and in the way. And that can account for, a lot of things on defense. He's not the quickest or most fleet of foot defender by any means. He's not one of these guys who has these sort of horrifying contests, horrifying if you're the three-point shooter taking the shot in the corner. He's not coming out there with those Chris Boucher-like soaring contests or anything like that, but he's been pretty fundamentally sound. He knows where to stand. Like, he's a pretty good positional player. And I think there's a world here in which Juancho Hernangomez kind of carves himself out a bit of a rotation spot here going forward, whether it's as a fill-in for Otto Porter Jr., who's still out with the dislocated toe, whether it's filling in spots for Gary Trent Jr., if Trent is maybe warranting a benching or something like that. It's a really, really fascinating stretch of play here for Juancho, who I did not have super high hopes for coming into the season, but I'm pretty intrigued about right now, considering what he's done with all the injuries. So that's my maybe there's something there for Juancho Hernangomez going forward with the Raptors in a way I did not really anticipate at the outset of the season. All right, we're going to continue on. We're going to get into the Dude of the Week, and then we're going to answer a couple of your listener questions to round out the week. Before we do that, however, I want to tell you about Masterclass. Masterclass is a wonderful service that we now have sponsoring us here on the channel that is here to help you broaden your horizons, and you want to keep on learning stuff as you go along through life. You don't just stop learning once you finish up your degree or your high school, whatever it might be. Learning is a lifelong thing, and Masterclass is here for that, and they can help you learn from the world's best minds anytime, anywhere, and at your own pace. You can learn how to, for example, cook from Gordon Ramsay. You can learn how to write songs with John Legend. People who are at the top of their field are now offering you cinema quality classes that give you unparalleled access to a renowned instructor. Lessons range from specifically showing how to execute a technique to an instructor's insights about their craft, and that can be translated across many fields and disciplines. Sessions, a new product from Masterclass, allow for a deeper dive into the lessons over a month-long period. Sessions include projects to submit to a teaching assistant for feedback, as well as the opportunity to learn alongside a community of peers. I highly recommend you check it out. This holiday, give one annual membership and get one for free by going to masterclass.com/lockedon today. That's masterclass.com/lockedon. Terms apply. All right, we continue on here with your first listen of the day, digging into the Dude of the Week for the past 7 days for your Toronto Raptors. And the Dude of the Week this time out is our boy, Thaddeus Young, who... We talked about OG off the top. OG has been the bright spot of the down period for the Raptors here with the injuries, waiting for Pascal Siakam to get back. Fred VanVleet out of the lineup, Gary Trent Jr., Scottie Barnes cycling in and out. All of that's there. I really think Thaddeus Young, though, outside of OG, has been like the second most responsible player for the Raptors treading water during this stretch. He's just been so tight to watch. In the Nets game, 28 minutes, 12 points, 8 boards, 5 assists, 2 steals, 6 of 10. He goes 0 of 2 from 3. He's shooting 7% from 3, which is the one place to quibble with Thad Young right now. But it feels like every 2-pointer he puts up is going bottom. Like he really has this touch around the basket that's just a delight to watch. These surprising little floaters and hook shots that come out of nowhere, it seems. The way he connects everything together, the passing, the way guys can cut off of him, the way they can run Marc Gasol-like sets through Thad Young. It's been a delight. And I think we've really seen here the value of a guy like Thad, who is just this wonderful connector, an amplifier of other guys' best qualities. He makes other players better, which is really the best kind of player to have. And especially when you have a bunch of guys on your team, it's a pretty loaded roster in terms of guys who want the ball when they're at full health, at least. You have to sort of spread it around. There's the politics game to play. Thad Young is the perfect mediator for that politics game because he can make everyone eat, and he doesn't really have to eat himself. He's fine going 0 for 2 with 0 points in a game and grabbing 8 boards and throwing 4 assists. That is a beautiful thing to have on your team, a low usage guy who can increase the potency of your higher usage guys. And so we get to the question now of, once the Raptors get healthy, once Pascal Siakam is back, once they're hopefully working with at least something resembling their full rotation, there's obviously going to be a couple guys kind of always out. It just seems like that's the way the NBA rolls. But if they're able to get some semblance of health here, what's the ultimate role here for Thad Young on this team? He's been thrust into this sort of bigger role without Siakam. We haven't really seen him take the reins and be a big part of the team with Siakam in the lineup. And I think that that's sort of an interesting question as they figure to reincorporate Siakam here. How does that affect Thad's minutes? How does that affect, how the bench is being used? To me, other than Chris Boucher, Thad is the first guy getting minutes off the bench for me. He's just been so good. He can play small ball 5. He can slide up to the 4. That's fine. You can play him in those long weirdo lineups and have him be your de facto point guard if you really want. I think he kind of does it all. And look, there are going to be some matchups where you don't really want small ball 5 Thad out there. Obviously we saw in the Hawks game, the length of a Clint Capella, the floating touch of Trae Young, and just the fact that it was a really difficult sort of pick and roll coverage for Thad Young to navigate at his size. The way you saw Christian Koloko just kind of use his extra length to defend that. It's just something Thad Young's never going to have. But most matchups aren't going to really demand a traditional center. That's kind of the way the Raptors have built their team. And I do wonder if maybe we start to see Thad close some games, and if Gary Trent Jr., the guy who was kind of the lightning rod for criticism this week from Nick Nurse, maybe he's a guy who starts to lose his minutes late in games as the Raptors are trying to close. Maybe they think, all right, we have Fred, we got OG, we got Scottie, we got Pascal. We throw Thad in as the small ball 5. Maybe they're a little light on shooting, but they've gotten around worse shooting lineups in the past. And if you can have Scottie Barnes taking catch and shoots, that's great. Pascal's been totally fine from catch and shoots this season as well, too. And maybe there's enough shooting there to make it work. And if that's the case, that should be like a monstrous defensive lineup. It puts Thad at small ball 5, which is where he's been the best. It's where he's been his best so far this year. You have Scottie and Pascal out there who are pretty good helping rim protectors. Pascal's incredible. Scottie, I think that's been one of the positives of his defensive development this season, is what he's done as a help defender at the rim. I think that's a kind of an interesting closing lineup, and I would like to see it. And I think Thad has kind of earned the right to close there, similar to how I think Chris Boucher has also earned the right to close a little bit more often. It's a tough thing to mess with, right? Because it's easy to forget the first 5 or so games when they were healthy, and basically any time they've had their main 5 starting guys available, they've been a clutch time monster. They've destroyed teams in close games, late in games. And I think a big part of that is that there's 5 options on the floor you got to worry about. You can't sell out too much to stop one guy because someone on the floor is more than capable of burning you. And I think it works for that reason. But also, if Gary Trent Jr. is not going to defend the way the Raptors want him to defend, if he's not going to hit his shots and he's down to 31% from 3 after going 1 of 8 against the Nets, maybe Thad Young becomes the guy you can kind of slide in there. Again, Boucher at times as well. I'm sure Koloko will get some looks there too. But I think one of the nice things we've seen here from this last couple weeks is we've seen a few guys kind of emerge as potential options late in games to give the Raptors some variability. There will certainly be plenty of games where they close with their 5 guys that they have started games with when they're at full health, and that's totally fine. It's worked, like we've said. But the thing about the Raptors is trying to find different ways to peel the apple, and they might have just a nice set of guys they can kind of cycle in for that Gary Trent spot in the starting 5, or more so the closing 5 than anything else, with Thad and Boucher and Koloko, and even Otto Porter Jr. if you want to go small and extra shooty. That's a beautiful thing that the Raptors have kind of found here, despite all of the hell of the last couple of weeks with the injuries. It's just, they are a team that has a little bit more multiplicity to it, I think, than they used to have, which is really great. And it's how you win games in the playoffs. It's how you go deep in the playoffs. You're able to play multiple ways and throw different looks at teams and not have to rely on one thing that over the course of a 7-game series, a team might be able to scheme for. I do think we've seen, and Thad Young has been the biggest reason for this, the guy who's kind of shone the most. There's a lot of different options the Raptors have now to close games, plenty of reasonable players to toss into a game when it's down to the sort of nitty gritty. And I think that's pretty cool. And Thad Young, man, he's An absolute delight. I have already requested, I haven't had a Raptors jersey purchased for me in a very long time. I have requested myself a Thad Young jersey for Christmas because that dude rocks. We're going to continue on here around to the show with a couple of listener questions to send you off into your weekend. Before we do that, however, got to tell you about betonline.net, which is your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. Get the latest odds and trends from every professional and amateur league out there, from football to basketball to soccer and esports, everything else in between. They've got it all at betonline.net. The World Cup's on right now, man. I'm having a blast watching the World Cup, as much as the, situation around this World Cup is extremely dubious. The games themselves have been extremely entertaining, and if you want to throw a little scratch down on these games, BetOnline is the place to go to figure out where should you be putting your money, where should you be investing, and saying, all right, that team, that's worth my bet. That team's not worth my bet. They're like, all of it's there. They're going to make you the informed wager. So go check them out. BetOnline.net. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline is where the game starts. All right, we continue on here, rounding out your show here on a Friday, your first listen of the day, of course, with a couple of mailbag questions from the good people out there who helping around at the show. Let's get to this one here from our pal, RapsFan902 on Twitter. If the injuries continue even at, say, half the rate so far, not just for us, but for the whole league, what would you be looking at for when evaluating this team as the trade deadline approaches? This is a good question. I will say, like, no matter what the injury situation is this season, I don't think I'm, like, selling off parts for futures. That's not a thing. I think the Raptors are well past that point as a team in their build right now. So that's kind of out. I think most likely, if they're super injured, it feels like they're just never going to get healthy. If it feels like they're constantly chasing the dragon, as it were. I wonder if maybe they hold off at the deadline on making any significant adds. Like, that could be one way to look at it. It's just not coming together for us this year. We've lost too much ground in the standings. We're still floating around 500 because we keep on having to tread water with players out. This is all hypothetical, of course, but if that is the case, I do wonder if maybe they say, you know what, this isn't the year. There's plenty of other teams in the Eastern Conference who's far more likely to have it be their year than us. Maybe we kind of keep our chips and wait for next year before we make any big moves at the deadline. The other way to think of it is, hey, maybe they go trade for guys to bolster the depth and make it so the team has a little bit more in terms of options in the event you do get hurt. I don't love that because, if your main guys are hurt, no amount of depth is going to make you a better playoff team or a team more capable of making some noise in the postseason. Without Pascal, without Scottie, without Fred, without OG, this team's not going anywhere. And so if those are the guys who continue to have injury issues, then again, no amount of depth is going to save the team if you can't get those guys on the floor together. I'm hopeful that they will, right? Like, it was a freak injury for Pascal. Scottie, obviously, he keeps falling weird, and it's very troublesome that he keeps on falling so weirdly on his knees and ankles. Fred's a continual sort of source of old guy pains and stuff, and kind of respect it. It's kind of fun. In a weird way. It's not fun that he's not playing, but I do like that there's a relatable player on the Raptors and that, hey, I hurt like him too. That's cool. But yeah, it sucks. It's really difficult to evaluate anything, right? We're sitting at this point now. We're almost 20 games into the season. Usually the 20-game mark is where you look at and sort of take a scope around the league and say, hey, that team is good. That team is bad. The first 20 games have kind of told us this. We don't know anything about this team. We don't know what the ceiling of this team is right now. We don't know if they can string together some of the play that we saw in the first part of the season where they looked like absolute world beaters. We still don't know, and we haven't really had a chance to figure it all out. So, I don't think they're going to go and make a bunch of moves at the deadline if this continues, where they're sort of making big sweeping decisions about the team that they haven't actually seen play together. I do think the sort of big trade deadline thing this year to keep an eye on is Gary Trent Jr. I think that's going to be a thing independent of how injured the team is. It might, if the Raptors are super injured and Gary Trent Jr. is struggling because he's not able to create stuff for himself without the best playmakers around, that maybe kills his trade value. Maybe that makes it him less likely to opt out of his deal after the season. That's a consideration here too. The next couple months will be very telling here. But yeah, it's a really good question that I don't have a great answer for because it's really hard to make trade deadline evaluations when you haven't really had the chance to even evaluate the team you have on hand. We saw last year this happen. The first couple months were very all over the place, and they kind of found some stasis in the back part of the year. Hopefully they can do that again. We'll see. Next question here comes from Jake Talk Sports 3 asking, do we need to have a conversation about Nick Nurse? I don't know what type of conversation you want to have about Nick Nurse. I'm assuming this is in the negative vein, like is Nick Nurse actually a good coach or something along those lines. Look, as much as it's hard to evaluate the team without its players, I think it's actually maybe a little easier to evaluate Nick Nurse when they're kind of helter-skelter in terms of the guys that are available. And I kind of think Nick Nurse is doing a really good job, man. I know I sound like a shill and a homer, and it's maybe uninteresting to not have a ton of critiques for Nick Nurse, but honestly, man, like, what else is he supposed to do with the roster he has right now? I know there's concerns about him calling out Gary Trent Jr. Look, they're adults. Coaches call out players. Players learn and adapt and figure it out, and usually it's all fine, and he's had success with that before. I'm willing to give him the benefit of the doubt on the Gary Trent Jr. one as well. It's not like Gary Trent Jr. is playing well. Like, Nick Nurse isn't lying when he says he's been disappointing. He has been. So, like, I don't see an issue there calling your guys out to account. It's certainly something you don't want to see all the time because that could kind of sap the vibes of the room, but I don't think we're at risk of that happening at the moment. They've won four of the 9 games without Pascal. They've looked pretty good in a lot of them. We're very much in that Hawks game on Sunday without most of their players as well, or Saturday. I just feel like at this point, if you look at Nick Nurse and think anything other than, man, that dude's really good at winning basketball games, like, that's kind of the point, right? Like, is that not what we're in it for? He's very good at doing the thing that coaches are meant to do. I think he's a very good coach. Obviously, not everything's perfect. He's very easy to nitpick with his weirdo lineup combos and stuff like that. The overplaying of guys, certainly, although the overplaying of guys is very much tied to the fact that he wins games all the time. Like, you play your best players, you're going to win more games. He's very good at milking the most out of whatever he has on hand. He can make lemonade out of limes. He's very good at it. I don't know. There are certainly some things. The way they play, is it sustainable? Are they going to be able to, maintain this extreme style of play where transition is everything? The half-court offense doesn't give them a whole lot. They're kind of always trying to overcompensate for that half-court offense in other areas of the floor, and that maybe leads to other sort of cascading domino effects. But ultimately, I think Nick Nurse is a very good coach. He's done a lot with the roster he has on hand, and I don't think there's a conversation that really needs to be had about him. He's, I could see why maybe he's a persnickety guy, and the players might have their misgivings about some of the ways he handles things, but ultimately it seems like they're in a pretty good spot, and everyone's in a pretty good mood all the time. So I don't really think it's all that much of a concern. I don't think there's much of a conversation to be had about Nick Nurse, if we're being honest, though I appreciate the question. Last one here comes from regular question asker at @thoseguys_TG. We all love Thad Young. If you were to trade him, would a first-round pick be too high of a price? Wouldn't trade him, just asking. Interesting question. I don't think they're in the business of trading Thad Young right now. I don't think he would have a ton of value out there. I don't think he's getting you a first-round pick, especially considering how first-round picks are like the chief currency in the NBA right now. And I just don't know why you would trade Thad Young. He's very good. He's very effective and helpful for this team. The only way Thad Young gets dealt is as like a salary matching thing later in the season. If they're trying to trade for a bigger salary guy, then Thad Young comes in. If they're trying to trade for Kevin Durant, for example, sometime down the line, Thad Young comes in, and his money is pretty helpful for making that happen. But no, I don't think you're getting a first-round pick for him. I think Thad is very valuable to this team in the way that he's probably not as valuable to other teams, and there's just no need to really move on from him or consider trading him unless you have to match some salaries, and then, of course, he might just be an unfortunate casualty of that. But for now, keep him, baby. He's awesome. Start him. I don't care. He's amazing. I could watch Thad Young all day, every day, and be pretty content with that. With that, we're going to round up the show. Thanks for the questions that came in. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for putting up with the missed episode yesterday as my voice was very much shot. We'll be back again next week. There's going to be some weird scheduling stuff next week as I got to travel in the middle of the week. And so I'm not sure of the actual recording schedule for next week as it stands right now. We'll get the usual Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday shows in. Back part of the week, a little bit TBD at the moment. But either way, thank you so much for tuning into the show. Please go and support the podcast by following, subscribing, rating, and reviewing on your favorite podcast apps. We are also on YouTube if you want to go hit the big red subscribe button over there and support the show in video form. Again, I don't even ask you to watch the videos. Just go on, subscribe, and then juice the stats. That's all we need, baby. Or if you want to watch it on mute in the background, I'm also going to be all right with that too. Either way, thank you so much. Have a wonderful weekend. Hope our American pals had a great Thanksgiving yesterday, and we will talk to you again on Monday with another episode of Locked On Raptors. Go listen to Locked On Leafs now, baby. Bye-bye.